And now, it's The Law Show on CL 650, a comprehensive look at everything you need to know about the law. And now, it's The Law Show on CL 650, a comprehensive look at everything you need to know about the law.
Isn't it The Love Show? The Law Show. Valentine's Day, it is The Law Show on CL 650. Immigration law, we have Gordon Maynard and Alex Stojcevic from MKS Law in downtown Vancouver. VancouverLaw.ca is their website, specializing in immigration and citizenship. Now, here we are, just a month into the new year, and we want to talk about, I guess, controversial, we'll get into that, express entry. Exposed 1 year later is a study that came out. We'll get into that in just a moment. We'll find out exactly what express entry is. But Alex, you had a speech at UBC where you were talking there about express entry, and what was the subject? How did you frame it?
So I was part of a panel for the UBC Alumni Association at UBC's very beautiful new alumni hall that they've just opened, with a number of other panelists, including two of the senior staff at the U.S. consulate here in Vancouver, as well as people for a couple of representatives from Customs and Border Patrol in Blaine, and one quite distinguished U.S. immigration lawyer. And the panel discussion was cross-border issues affecting UBC graduates. And the highlight for me was just how much interest, how much UBC as an institution is now an international one. Mm-hmm. You had people from 64 different alumni associations that were all over the world for UBC. And the issues that the graduates were discussing included everything from immigration law in Hong Kong, Argentina, the United States. UBC feels itself very much as part of this highly skilled international talent creation system that we also covet. Mm-hmm. And it was quite ironic to me as we were sitting there talking about, express entry and how some of these foreign students could become permanent residents, just how much these people look at, these highly skilled people look at what will these countries offer them, mm-hmm. right? For them, it's like they're in a buffet table and you have, what does Australia offer me? What does Canada offer me? What do all these other countries offer me?
But that could also be a criticism of UBC, is that UBC isn't a local university anymore. It's catered to an international clientele. So if you have people coming from all over the world, it only makes sense that they're going to want to go outside of Canada too when they finish their degree.
That's an excellent question you pose. And let me say this back though. We polled and all the participants on what their status was in Canada. And 82% of the people that were at this conference were Canadian citizens.
Okay.
So that gives you a sense that people see themselves as part of an international community. Mm-hmm. And these are all these people were UBC graduates. So
I think a big part of it could also be that it's so expensive in Vancouver. Maybe I can take my new degree and polish it up and get more bang for my buck somewhere else, because it's a problem we have just generally in the city. You guys know this. Running a law firm in downtown Vancouver, it's hard to keep people in Vancouver. That's part
mm-hmm.
of it, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Well, there's got to be some element to it. There's no question about that. But even if it were cheaper, I think people's perspectives are different. In many respects, UBC, much like University of Toronto, are now institutions that have stepped out of their regional entities and have looked. Are looking beyond themselves.
All right, so let's get back to the headline we have for today's show. Express entry exposed 1 year later. That sounds quite ominous. So maybe, Gordon, you can talk about express entry. Give us a 30,000-foot level. What is it?
Sure. Express entry was a federal government program that was put in place last year, January 2015. It's been in operation for 1 year. Mm-hmm. It is a process for dealing with permanent resident applications of the economic category.
So that's people wanting to get a job or have a job and getting into the country.
People who want to become immigrants in Canada, people who want to become permanent residents. Some of them will already be workers here, mm-hmm. some of them will be students here, some of them will be overseas, but they all want to apply and come to Canada, not through sponsorship of a parent or a daughter or a spouse. They're coming in as economic immigrants. These are people who apply as federal skilled workers under the federal skilled program that was the point system. They are Canada Experience Class, which is people who have worked in Canada for a year, or they're federal skilled trade workers.
And these are people that you work with to
All the
help
time.
come in the country. This is a big part of your business,
This
right?
is
Big part of our business.
Big part of our business is particularly workers in Canada and students in Canada transitioning to permanent resident status. And they have to submit an application for permanent residence. Now, before express entry came into place, they would submit an application. If they qualified, they would fill out the paper, submit the application, and it would get in line for processing according to the regulations.
And it would just go at the bottom of the pile.
Yep.
And finally filter up to the top, right?
Exactly. And that was the problem, because there were no controls on the number of applications that could be made, but we're only taking 150,000, 170,000 a year economic class immigrants. So the backlogs built up. The government had to find a way to manage that, and they put in place the express entry system, which is they keep the same categories of immigration. They still keep the economic classes, but anybody who wants to immigrate must first of all jump into the express entry pool.
Okay.
And that's a fictional pool that exists in the internet. And you go to the internet and you submit your profile. You tell them who you are. And as long as you meet the eligibility for one of these economic programs, you get a number in the pool.
It's like a dating site.
It's like the golden ticket from Willy Wonka.
That's right.
Yeah, you get the golden ticket, then you get to, once you get the ticket, then what happens?
You're swimming around in this pool.
Right.
And the ticket they gave you had a certain number of points attached to it. There's a magic computer in the internet that calculates your comprehensive ranking score. And every month or two, or maybe a couple of times a month, the government comes by with a net and they fish out the people with the best CRS scores. And those people are given invitations to apply. They're told, you can submit an application as a federal skilled worker. You can submit an application
In those
as a
silos
CEC.
that they had before, right?
Yep.
All those different categories.
Same applications they had before.
So they've added a layer.
Added a pool
have
in
added-
between.
right,
You have
right.
to dive into the pool, and then you have to get fished out with an invitation to apply. Now you can apply. And when you apply, when you get that invitation, you're given 60 days to apply. You apply over the internet, and the application is supposed to be processed in 60 days, or in 6 months. All right? So it's supposed to be a good process. Sounds great.
When this was announced, did you think, as specialists in this area, it's not a bad idea? Did you have reservations before it was implemented?
We were always apprehensive
Okay,
about
because
it.
anything with government, you're always going to think.
Well,
there's
in fairness, I had hopes because what this replaced was something that was equally inefficient and in many ways far less reliable, and that was a ministerial instruction regime. What was happening in the years prior to that is that they would simply make a ministerial announcement that they would process this category but not process that category. And then that would change every 4 or 5 months. This at least offered some certainty to everyone.
Well, except that it was put in place by ministerial instruction.
And then it wasn't put in place by ministerial instruction, dashing my hopes, as it were.
But
yes.
but
so
you
that's the
define-
second. That's the second part of the question. Is that's what the hope was? What's the reality?
The reality was that the fine print didn't come out until December 2014.
So
okay.
weeks before it was about to.
Exactly.
Just 2 weeks before it was put into place, finally the fine print came out. And what they put into the express entry pool was that for you to get fished out with an invitation to apply, you didn't stand much chance unless you had the bonus points. And the bonus points only came one of two ways. You either had to have a work permit supported by a labor market impact assessment, an LMIA. That's a very important term. Not all work permits have LMIAs. All right? Some do. But if your work permit had an LMIA attached to it, then you got bonus points.
Okay.
If you didn't have an LMIA attached to your work permit, you could still apply to the province for special nomination, express entry nomination, and that would give you bonus points, and that would be done through your employer.
And let's give you some context of what that means. So the system works out of 1,200 or 1,300 points. The lowest category draw that has occurred since the system opened was 451?
453.
453. For you to get 600 of these possible points is an LMIA or a provincial nomination. So if you don't have one of those things, you're not really out of 1,200. You're out of 600.
Right.
To get 600 without this, you pretty much need master's degree, fluent English, and you better be 30. You can't be 40 or 45. You have to be perfect on age, perfect on language ability, so you need test scores on your IELTS or your CELPIP that are as high as they can be. Have a master's degree and Canadian work experience, or you're not going to qualify.
And tall and good looking wouldn't hurt either.
Well, it's the only thing missing, isn't it?
So to put a face on this problem, people who came to Canada, for instance, or are in Canada with work permits as senior executives in Canadian companies. They're intercompany transferees.
And these guys are 50s and 60s.
They're
right?
in their 40s, 50s. They're making $300,000 a year, $500,000 a year or more. They have responsible positions. They got lots of years in the workforce.
Paying a lot of income tax.
And the company wants to keep them here. Those were people who previously were able to apply either under CEC or under federal skilled worker, and their applications would be processed. Yes, it would take time. But you put these people into the express entry pool, and they're coming out with 435 points.
Low scores.
They aren't making the minimum 450, and they haven't been picked.
So I'm guessing that this LMIA is the key.
Absolutely, it is a key, and has turned into a profoundly influential key and a profoundly bad decision to link it to the permanent resident process.
Now, what does LMIA mean?
Labor Market Impact Assessment.
So describe what that means.
It means that if an employer wants to, it's a piece of paper that's mainly used not for immigration, but for giving people work permits as temporary workers.
So say that you're not going to have an impact on a Canadian.
That's
Negatively
right.
on Canadians.
This was one of the standard ways in which work permits were issued. It used to be called a labor market opinion, and the employer would advertise and demonstrate that they couldn't find a Canadian to do the job. They would then apply to what was called HSDC at the time, and they would get an LMO confirming that they need to look outside of Canada to fill the position. And then that individual would take the LMO and apply for their work permit, and that gave the officer issuing the work permit permission to give that person a work permit. And Alex will take over here and talk about the events that occurred 3 years ago that caused the Conservative government to revamp the foreign worker program. It became a very political issue, and what came out of that was the LMIA.
All right, so we're not going to jump into that right now, Alex, because I mean, this was headline stuff across the news when it happened about the foreign workers, right?
Yeah.
And what happened, and this brought about this change for this LMIA application.
Right.
So we're going to take a quick break, and when we come back, we'll jump into that. And we also have a scathing report that has just been done by whom?
The Canadian Chamber of Commerce.
Yeah.
And the report is called Immigration for a Competitive Canada, Why Highly Skilled International Talent is at Risk, and their complaints are all about express entry and the labor market impact assessment.
And that's why the show this week is called Express Entry Exposed 1 year later. You're listening to The Law Show on CL 650. We're talking with immigration lawyers from MKS Law in downtown Vancouver, Gordon Maynard and Alex Stojkovic. We're here, and we'll pick it up right there when we come back.
There's more of the show still ahead. This is The Law Show on CL 650.